Hello everybody, and welcome to yet another Social Blueprint interview. Friends, we are always trying to bring you, as you well know, very interesting, diverse people within a community, some of whom you may know very well, and some of you who may not know at all. But today we are joined by Lahra Carey, and the reason I'm so interested is because Lahra has such a diverse, interesting background, story. It's going to make you laugh, it may make you cry a little bit, and something in between. But for sure, you'll find it interesting and you'll have a strong takeaway. Lahra, welcome to the Social Blueprint.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey Lahra, as I mentioned in the intro, you have so much diversification, so many interesting tidbits. But I thought we'd start out with something that's very close to everybody. I know we have a lot of Carlton supporters.
Please forgive me, guys. We're doing well. We're going to be great.
Lahra, you're a member of the Carlton board. Can you just tell us, how did that come about?
Well, I was approached quite a while ago. So I've been on the board for a year. Before that time, I was approached because there was a matrix that many boards have looking for particular skills.
Right.
And my skill set was brand, crisis management, communications. And I was vetted. I was asked first whether I wanted to do it and whether I'd be prepared to. And my son said, if you don't come home. So I went through a rigorous interview process. There were other members of the board at the time as well that I had to meet because the board changed, as everybody knows, subsequently. Right. But at that time, I met each of the members and got interviewed and went through a nominations committee that's an external committee. And they said, thank you, you are what we're looking for, but we don't have a position. And so I kind of went on with my life until one day in the middle of a review, they said, we need you. And suddenly everything changed. Half the board changed. The president changed. We had to get on top of what this review had found. Ultimately, we changed the coach and the CEO, which is really all that we are responsible for hiring as the board.
Right.
And got on with a new season.
How is the culture? Because clearly it has changed at Carlton.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you noticed that as well. So the CEO, Brian Cook, very much, this was one of his biggest mandates, and Vossi when he came in. So I think that it's fair to say that the club, there was an atmosphere, two things were happening. One was within the playing group, there was an air of kind of entitlement. Well, I'm here, I'm a Carlton player, but it was a very selfish kind of feeling and a selfish game that those players were playing.
Right.
There had to be a whole new approach to the leadership and to the way the players interacted with each other. Humility was what was introduced. And it's interesting because from a club perspective, it's not enough to start that. It's not just the players. We think about the guys who run onto the ground, well, this year, 23 weeks, and the women who are now doing that as well. But it's about all aspects of administration, of the membership team, of Carlton in business, of corporate. There's a whole machine behind the club, and everybody had to change the way they were seeing what they were doing. So there was a downtrodden kind of feeling of, we're not going to win, we never win. There was a feeling of huge tumult all the time. There was changes, the coach had been changed, and they needed a feeling that there was a really strong direction. Right. And I say that also respecting the job that Mark Giudice, the former president, did. Like, he did an amazing job in rebuilding the finances, the facilities. Icon Park is incredible. Yeah. He was influential in terms of getting a women's team up. Very influential in terms of establishing Carlton in business. He did a whole lot of things, but ultimately exactly the problem that you're talking about was this cultural issue, and everything needed to change very, very quickly. Right. Which I think it did.
Yeah, it's incredible when you just roll the clock back, say 12 months ago. And 12 months, let's face it, is not a lot of time. The difference is enormous. And also what I'm interested in is, clearly the culture has changed. How do you also pair that up with, at the end of the day, you do have to get measured, and for better or for worse, at a football club, they usually measure you in wins and losses. And how do you measure, if I was just saying, I look at Carlton's season as incredibly successful, they frankly got a little bit unlucky, but that they didn't get into the finals, but certainly they could have been there. And if I was giving my advice, I'd say keep doing more of the same. But how do you keep that culture with actually getting the real results that you want to?
I guess, I mean, the first thing is it has to be really woven into apart from everything about the club, it has to be woven into the way the players interact with each other, the way they approach training, the way they approach the pre-season. Now, we only got the new coach at the beginning of the pre-season, actually into the pre-season, so he didn't have very long. It wasn't like we had and he could only take them so far.
Right.
And he did way more than we had expected, really, in terms of how we were playing. So you saw that we didn't have the stamina for a whole game. At the beginning of the season, we did really well in the first half. The skills were there. You know, everybody was motivated, couldn't maintain it. By the end of the season, we could. Right. We also fought until the end. So things shifted, but there's only so much that you can do within that 23 weeks.
Sure.
And when you say, you know, it was, I mean, everyone talks about that last point.
Of course.
But actually it was the last 4 games. We just didn't, we brought for the last 2 games way punched above our weight. It was the 2 before that probably, which we didn't win, mistakes were made, players that didn't slow down to think before they kicked, players that were probably, possibly in some circumstances too generous with the teamwork and not enough about, I can take this. Right. So there's tweaking to be done during the pre-season, and we're really hoping that the players don't go off and have a crazy great time, because they're all able to go overseas for the first time in 3 years as well. Sure. So we don't get them back until December, but we're hoping that they come back. They will be incredibly motivated. That taste of victory was enough to, and the bitterness of losing that, they are raring to go and ready to go.
Yes. Well, I would direct you to watch Tom Brady, obviously one of the greatest sportsmen at a time, and he talks about how in professional sports, the margin between winning and losing is so slim that all you can really do is get yourself in a position, and then hopefully the victories do take care of themselves more so than the losses.
Yeah, absolutely. And 2023 will be our year.
Absolutely. Hey, Lahra, you said that you were hired for a specific skill set that you bring. It is in PR, branding, more specifically crisis management. Just tell everyone a little bit about yourself, because I think it is incredibly important. And not only that, it's a skill that I cannot think of anyone who doesn't need it.
I started as a journalist, so I was 17 years old and left school and went to the ABC, and against my parents' wishes, because they thought I should have a degree, and so they forced me to do a degree while I was doing journalism, and I had a ball. I worked for 5 years as a radio journalist and then 5 years as a television journalist, and in fact the transition from radio to television is a little interesting story in itself, because I had kind of got to the end of what I wanted to do as a radio reporter, and I went and took 6 months off travelling around South America, and on the way home I got caught in the biggest earthquake ever in LA, and
1991, right?
92,
okay.
And at the time the correspondent who was in Washington said they have earthquakes all the time in LA, I'm not going. So I ended up finding a CNN crew and doing direct reports back into the news.
Incredible.
And when I got home, they said, come and work in TV. So I had a whole new kind of career. It was really exciting.
So you were in Northridge then. It must have been amazing.
It was terrifying, you know, and really amazing. And every time we do have these little earthquakes here, it kind of triggers that memory of what is going on. It was the middle of the night. Terrifying.
Yes.
But great experience in terms of live reporting from, you know, the closest I'll ever get to kind of a disaster scene. Exactly. Right. I hope, in terms of reporter. So when I got back, and I did my 5 years of TV, and then I sort of thought I want to do something else, and I didn't. And there's an interesting story here too. So I was a court reporter for quite a while.
Yes.
And Bill Shorten, who was then with Maurice Blackburn, and he was a lawyer and gave me a lot of stories. And he said, "Listen, can you come and come into the law firm and tell us which stories would be good for news stories?" And I said, "And he will pay you." And I said, "Oh, okay." I was on a fairly low journalistic salary.
You needed what you can.
I said, how many cases do you want me to look at? He said, "Oh, there's probably about 20,000. And I was like, "I'm not doing that. But what I will do is create a program so that I can teach your lawyers what to look for." And this was before media training was a thing. And so I started that. And that was kind of my break into a taste of the other side, what journalists call the dark side in a PR. And so then after that, I continued as a journalist, and a really influential person in my life, James McKenzie, who's now quite a prolific board member, and well, he's sort of retiring, but he's been a chair of quite a few organisations, including Development Victoria. But he, at the time, was the CEO of the TAC, Transport Accident Commission. Sure. And his PR person was someone that I used to work with, and he prepped James for this interview as his first interview as CEO, and he said, look, some bastard might ask you this question. And I was the bastard that asked the question. And so James wanted to meet me, and after that spent years trying to convince me that I should I should go to the dark side and I should work in PR. So when one day he got the opportunity to be the CEO of what was called Artist Services, and some people may remember Steve Vizard he had a David Letterman style show.
Okay.
You were probably still in the States. But he had an organisation. He owned the Comedy Channel. He owned and he wrote lots of comedies and creative films. And he started a PR agency, and James McKenzie was the CEO. So I had no idea what I was doing. And I went into this job thinking this is going to be something different.
Right.
And I learned everything really from the people who worked for me.
It's amazing. So a couple of things, just to back up for a second. Did you always know you seem like a very driven, very motivated person? And I'm curious, frankly, especially we have a lot of teenage girls that watch the show. Did you always have that instinct in you that you wanted to do something?
No, I knew that I wanted to be a journalist.
Okay, that's right.
That I absolutely knew.
Right.
And I applied for cadetships. I got an offer for the Herald as a business reporter. The Herald doesn't even exist anymore, but at the time, but just before I got offered this job at the ABC. And in truth, I probably thought I would be a writer. I love writing.
Right.
And it was my passion at school, but I was 17 and I thought, okay, this will be fun. And I was the last cadet that the ABC took that didn't have a degree.
Right.
And I knew that's what I wanted to do. My parents were very unsure that this was a good decision at that age. But after that, every single move has been just serendipity. Or just saying yes.
Well, you may say it is serendipity, but I also think, to me, your meta skill is the ability to communicate. And is that something, and I believe personally that sometimes you do have to play left to your strength. Have you always had that ability to just communicate?
Always. You have to have people around me. But I definitely think as I've gotten older, I've gotten better at reading people.
Right.
Going, aha, I've seen this before, I've been here before. There's very few situations that you are in, I think, by the time you get to 50-something, that you haven't been there before.
Right.
And so the ability to see that and know what's worked and what hasn't and recalibrate.
Right.
I think emotional intelligence is underrated, and I think what we found during COVID, which is now very much rated where it should be, is the importance of connection, human connection.
Right.
So really listening and really understanding. I think fundamentally my superpower is less communication than strategic thinking. Right. Being able to stand back and say, hang on, what you think you want is not what you really need. It's this.
Yeah, and I'd love to dig into the weeds on the PR and the communication and thinking about it strategically. I feel like the world is showing us mixed messages right now in social media as far as, on one hand, be authentic. But on the other hand, it seems like so many times the people that are the biggest bully in the world or in the room, maybe somebody in Russia, happens to be quote unquote winning at the game of life. How do you match up these two diverse things of being authentic, but then at the same time it seems like the people that are not authentic are winning?
I don't know that anyone who's not authentic gets to win for long. I think fundamentally, and we're finding this across corporate Australia, when I came into PR, it was the marketing manager that would be put up and deliver the lines. And that's it. You don't say anything else, you just say this no matter what they ask you. And that was the approach.
Rinse and repeat. Yes.
Exactly. And now when I media train, I'm in a room with executives that have very different positions from each other and know very different parts of the business, who are the owners of the expertise and the information. Right. So in an information sense, we're often saying you need to be able to be a thought leader because you are a leader, you have your own thoughts, you should say what you think. And so when you start to have people who are actually saying what they think and losing the fear of being wrong. So, for example, I'll say, what is your prediction about, in this particular industry? And they'll be like, well, I don't know, I don't give myself permission to say that. But when you say, why not? Are you worried that in 10 years someone's going to come back and say, hang on, you said this and you're wrong?
Sure.
Have courage. And that's part of that authenticity.
Right.
The other part of it is, and I think what you're referring to partly, is where we see authenticity as the victimhood. So we've got this culture of being a victim at the moment as well. So it's like, tell your story of pain, tell your
Right.
story, and take the world with you. And that's interesting too, particularly, and I find there's a dichotomy between how women are generally not comfortable, women in positions of power want to have that protection of the
Right.
corporate self. I'm afraid to be pulled down. I don't want to be seen as a victim, and I don't want to reveal those vulnerabilities in myself. And it's a balance.
Right, so they almost go over the top the other direction, if you will.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So men are more prepared to have a go, reveal something about themselves, are not so concerned. And I'm generalising here, obviously. But we are sick of the executive who does appalling things and then says, I'm sorry. And it means nothing. He delivers the lines, and it's just not, that's where you lack the authenticity. So people think it's authentic because they're giving the apology and they're reflecting on their behaviour and they're saying the right things, but we can tell the difference.
It feels very scripted when people do that. And also, I think that people that don't know, you're also, I believe it's on the Australian Board of Directors, like you've taken the directorship courses, is that correct?
Yes, the Australian Institute of Company.
Right, so you'd be very familiar with a lot of CEOs, and frankly, a lot of them are on ASX companies, and you feel like that they are reading the 3 bullet points, but there's no solution, if you will.
That's right. And it's interesting because as a board member, it's very different to being an advisor to the executive team or an advisor to the board, which I do, particularly in crises.
Right.
And it's really interesting to see how the instinct is to obfuscate. How can I get away with saying the least or showing the least or not?
Right.
Can they prove it? So there's a real difference between businesses who stand up and leaders of those businesses who say, this is unacceptable and we're going to look at our policies genuinely and make change because we don't think this is the right way to behave.
Right.
Than those who say, well, we've been caught out. How do we get away with this and how do we get out of it quickly?
Right. And interesting, and you said, and I guess this really is getting into it now. You said there are 3 basic strategies of dealing with crisis. Is that correct?
Yes, I do. I always say to new clients, you've got 3 choices.
Okay.
And the choice.
A free tidbit here.
This is it. Well, you either did it and you know you did it and you're fixing it.
Right.
Or you did it, you didn't know you did it, but now that you do, you're going to do everything about fixing it, or you didn't do it.
Right.
Or you're going to stick to the line that you didn't do it. But that's the 3. And I always say that first because I say I need to know where you stand in those 3 because a very different strategy to each of them.
Yeah.
Now, the I didn't do it doesn't mean they didn't do it. It just means they're going to say they didn't do it.
Yeah, but the one thing I think is for sure is that, as we all know, over a 30-year career, if not, you're going to face some crises.
Yeah. Well, other people's crises, and yes, my own too.
And maybe that's a transition to just talk about, for people that don't know your story, life changes in an instant.
Yeah.
Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, end of a summer holiday in 2016 or early 2017 with my kids and my husband down at our beach house on the Great Ocean Road. And Ben, who was a paraglider, went paragliding on the last day of this holiday. I was heading back to Melbourne the next day to go back to work.
Right.
And I said to him, don't be late, I've got to hit the road. And he went, I won't. I went, don't be late. And he fell on a cliff top with a gust of wind that didn't allow the 2 seconds that he needed for his parachute to reinflate, and he lost his life on that cliff top. And our lives changed. I had a 13-year-old son and 12-year-old twin girls, and the girls were about to start high school, and a dog that we went to pick up in a week, and life was in an instant, as you say, completely no warning. And it's interesting because I've met so many widows now and so many people, and it's a very different journey to someone who, say, loses a spouse from a long illness when you have no warning. So we had no will. Right. He had, there were a million things to deal with, just,
logistics, if you will.
Yeah, as well as the emotional fallout, which is, and takes a long time for your brain to catch up with the circumstances when something like that happens. Still now, his presence for me and his, I thought it would fade, and it doesn't. Right. So, imagining that he's going to walk in is sort of my brain can still sometimes
Or
trick
the
me
phone
into
ringing.
that. Yeah, that's right. But in other ways,
Right.
we have moved on from that point. But in the beginning, it was just unfathomable. But I must have known that it was true because you can't stop crying and you can't.
Right.
But then this other part does take over. I mean, I remember my sister tells me in the middle of all of this, there was a particular email that I had to send on that first day back at work. And even I'm saying to her, I've got to send this email to James. And my sister just took over everything. She took my phone, she took my computer. I made a call to my 2IC in my business and told her what happened. But, it wasn't like you would imagine someone would be hysterically crying. And it was like this, I don't know what happens now. I don't know what to do with this. I've never been here.
Right,
that idea that, I'm 50 and I've been here before.
Right.
I hadn't been here before.
And I suppose, like, without getting off to the feeling of, like, I've never been here before, or that things can change very quickly, as you know, is that a feeling that you do take with you now that maybe you didn't have beforehand?
Yes, but it's funny because when things happen to the kids like that, and I look at them and go, how can you not think this is a possibility? Anything's a possibility.
Right.
The impossible happened, you know. So everyone deals with it in their own way and makes sense of it in their own way.
Right.
There's no sense to be made, but you move on in your own way and you take out of it. As you know, my girls started a not-for-profit. That was their way of kind of incorporating their father's memory in a positive way out of what happened that was so awful. But no, there's no, and that's the interesting thing, not only is there no guidebook, but actually even people that you speak to. So Ben had lost his best friend 10 years before his own death, and he died suddenly and shockingly in a car accident with his daughter. And his widow, who'd been living overseas, was obviously a very close friend of ours.
Right.
And her experience, and while she was amazing and guided me, was different to mine.
Yeah.
And, unfathomable, again, even if I've been through something that is unfathomable to most people, she lost her child as well.
Yeah.
So a whole different level of just inconceivable.
Yeah, and it's, it's interesting also because you see we are at the end of, like, the Holocaust generation, if you will. And so many survivors didn't talk about it for years and years. You do hear that consistent theme. And then on the other hand, you hear about people that really just only talk about it. You seem to have some type of in-between. It is, as you said, there's no one size fits all, but is that how you see yourself as well?
Yes, I think, partly because of the age of the kids, it was really, and I was going to always set the tone for them.
Right.
And the way to keep him alive. And it was really important for me that the kids would know their father, which has also been really, I could talk about this for days, but that's been interesting too, because their understanding of who he is changes as they reach different ages. And I know there's a whole nother phase. They're now, finishing school, but when they become parents themselves, there'll be a whole nother layer. And so to talk about him and to tell stories was really important.
Right.
But then there was the frustration that the stories became almost caricatures, It was the same stories and the same funny incidences and the same... So trying to remember, other things and keeping those stories going, but also educating people around, there's this idea that, you get through it, you get past it, you move on. These are the words we use about grief.
Yeah.
And so my idea...
I totally agree with that.
Sorry?
I said I don't totally agree with that, but come on.
Well, that's what people say, you'll be fine and, you'll date again, and just things that are just not even connected to what I'm feeling, And so it was kind of, the idea was partly to also educate my circle, who was sort of like, people would go, you're so strong. I wasn't strong. I was crying in the fetal position every night in our walk-in wardrobe. I still talk to him. I don't feel strong.
Right.
And all people saying I could never get through that. Of course you do. You don't have a choice, So these sort of things to go, well, how do you? And what is the journey? So I'm trying to take people along that journey without being really annoying about it.
Yeah, no, it's great. And if it makes you feel better, because I lost my father when I was very, very young, your kids will feel differently over the years, I guarantee it.
Right. That is good to know. In a way,
good
information to have.
And one of the things, though, that you definitely do in a huge way is give back. Can you just talk about what you do and also how it helps you as much as it helps other people?
It's been something, and this was a really strong value that Ben and I both had, that we had lived such, I hate this word now because it's overused, but privileged lives.
For sure.
And it's the idea of saying, how do we use that position and use our skills to do something within our community and for the world that's going to make a better change. I can't just keep, making money, buying things, having holiday, knowing what else is happening in the world.
Right.
And so he was very involved with he ran the Young UIA.
Right.
And I was involved with JNF, and it was a funny point when we got together of arguing about which organisation did better work and was more worthy. But this was something
healthy competition.
Yeah, exactly. And so he was on the board of the King David School, and I took over from him. So it was interesting. And this is a real insight into, I guess, both of our thinking, where he was on the board at a time when the property needed to be sold and a new one found and a redevelopment organised. That was his skill set. He was in M&A, he was in finance, not my skill set. And at some point he said, this has been done, this needs you now. We need to communicate this to the community.
Right.
And so I stepped onto the council.
Interesting.
And then after he passed away, by coincidence, and a very short time later, they asked me to take over as president.
Right.
And I just find that the reward you get, yes, it's annoying and it's time consuming and there are a whole lot of, but there's so much about actually having an influence in an organisation that you care about and an issue that you're interested in. So Food Bank was also, for me, the idea of food insecurity was just something I'd never experienced and really wanted to be involved with the solution. And I've been lucky because the organisations that I've become involved with have really grown and prospered in the time that I have been part of the steering committee.
Sure. And taking those one at a time, Food Bank, the last one you spoke about, I don't think people realize just quite how many people go hungry. Can you just talk about it a little bit?
Look, I'm not totally across the numbers now because I stepped off the board a few years ago, but it is the thing that struck me more than the numbers, which is shocking, is the idea that, so we took my kids, when Mitch was, I think, in grade 2 or 3, they did an excursion to Food Bank. And one of the kids said, this couldn't happen, but I wouldn't need this.
Right.
And the reality is that they didn't understand is that anyone can end up in that position, and really quickly. The fact that at the moment I don't have to make a decision between can I afford medicine or rent,
sure,
or if someone gets sick and I'm down to the last dollar, what do I do? Not buy food. It's shocking, but how quickly, and particularly single women in their middle ages, in their middle age, are the ones who are disproportionately impacted by homelessness, by food insecurity, and by poverty. And they're not street people who are on drugs. These are people whose circumstances have ended up just leading them to somewhere where they just can't afford basic commodities of life.
Yeah, it's usually it's incredible. It's usually one or two decisions that completely change their course of life.
Yeah, that's right. And the vulnerability, and it's like, as a society, I feel we have a responsibility to do what we can to help. And some people pack boxes, which I also do sometimes, and some people make food, and I know you're involved with Sea Care, where there's the cooking and the preparing and the delivering. My skills are better used in terms of what we're driving the strategy to grow, and how can we do the most good.
Yeah, no, for sure. And also, I suppose, you said about the micro grants and just how a little bit can really go a long way. Can you just talk a little bit about your charity and what your children have done?
Yes, so my girls started a charity called Parachute after their father, and it provides micro grants of up to $500 for kids who are in situations of trauma. So it could be divorced parents, it could be the loss of a parent, it could be situations beyond their control. We've had a whole lot of different situations, and they fund things that make what my girls say made them feel normal after their father died. Music lessons, birthday parties, sporting club memberships, these sort of micro grants that go to making kids feel like there's some part of their lives that's still as it was.
I love how you are balancing everything together. What I also like is that you don't necessarily have all the answers.
No, I definitely don't. I wish.
I think that so many times people look and they say, they look at someone like yourself and they think that you have everything figured out. It's all, well and good and so forth and so on. And maybe that's why they make those comments like, you'll be fine. But it doesn't always work that way, does it?
No, I mean you've got to. I mean that's being human, isn't it?
Exactly.
And definitely, if any one of those people spoke to my kids, they'd be happy to fill them in on everything that goes wrong all the time. But you've got. I think there are some people, not because of any. There are some people who are comfortable taking on more, and there are people who aren't. Right. I've got lots of friends where they're offered a promotion or something, and I'll say go for it, and they'll be like, I don't need more. I'm having trouble dealing, and that's fine.
Right. Not
everyone has to step up or, create more. I like being busy.
Yes.
I like being challenged, and I've got a triage mentality where I can instinctively work out what is important and urgent and needs to be done now and can wait. And so the juggle is not as difficult, but there's definitely everyone makes stupid mistakes, makes big mistakes.
Right.
Has conflict, everyone's family is dysfunctional in its own way. And,
for sure.
And everybody has those days where they're going, what am I doing?
Yeah, it's funny, and maybe that's why you specialize in crisis, because as you said, you can prioritize very quickly in your mind naturally.
Yeah. Well, the crisis, that's a whole different area. That's where you're subsumed into someone else's hell.
Right.
And everything else stops. And for me as well. And that's where I do get, the kids are very, Mum, why are you looking at your phone again? And
right.
It's like that, because that comes first, because somebody else's career, life, something has happened where they just need someone to tell them what to do.
Yes.
And what the right way forward is. And that's where my life becomes part of their life.
Yeah, no, it's actually, and that in a way, I guess, is a way of giving back too, because sometimes the best thing you can do is just listen to them.
Yeah, maybe. I find with my work, they just want to know what to do.
Right.
Make it go away. And sometimes they say, I can't make it go away, and it will get worse before it gets better. But
right.
This is where it's going to get better. This is
right.
what we're going to do. And they're very grateful, I've been working with Metricon.
Yep.
And when the founder died very unexpectedly,
okay.
I felt that I could really relate to his children.
Right.
Because I'd seen what happened with Ben's business partners when they suddenly lost their partner.
Right.
And suddenly this business that had depended on this person who was at the forefront of every decision,
right.
suddenly went, what do we do? And so explaining what was going to happen, I think that helped them in their process as well. Apart from then getting in there and just doing the doing.
Yeah, no, it's, as you said, and also it's just so unexpected a lot of times, and that's what a crisis is it usually comes out of nowhere. If it wasn't, it wouldn't be a crisis, I suppose.
No, that's right. But even things that, people find themselves, well, now we're seeing even everybody knew the Queen would probably pass away
at some point.
In some point, and yet when it does, people are sort of scrambling, or this isn't how I thought it would feel, or what do we actually do, or who's involved. You've still got personalities, and it's not all about protocol. Right,
no, for sure. Unfortunately, we do have to keep it somewhat short. If there were one or two closing messages for people, what would they be?
On the big life piece, I'd say definitely prioritise friends, family and relationships. For me, that and your community, yeah. Because for me, when I stand at Ben's grave, I think he didn't want more time in the office. That's not what he would have wanted.
Right.
And you realise, what's because all those times where people are saying, I'm so busy, I'm so stressed. Slow down. There's nothing stopping you. Connect, breathe.
Right.
But here's the other part of that. Always say yes. Open yourselves to opportunity. Someone asks you to do something, just say yes. You never know what you're going to get out of that experience.
And for the person where, as you mentioned earlier, where they don't want the proverbial promotion, so they say no, how do they break through that self-imposed boundary, do you think?
Then find another way to expand your circle,
right.
Push a little bit against the walls to include something new, unexpected. It could be a relationship. It could be volunteering on a small
right.
way. You never know where it's going to lead.
Great advice. You never know what's going to happen in life. Thank you so much. Really, as I said, one of the most interesting people in the community. There's something here for everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye.